Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Tucker Johnson, and today it is my pleasure to host my colleagues Laszlo Varga, Renato Beninatto, and Marjolein Groot, who will be presenting findings from the recently published Nimdzi 100 Language Services Industry Report. We host events here at Nimdzi Insights as well as podcasts regularly, so make sure that you are subscribed to us on LinkedIn, follow us on YouTube, we're on Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcast, that's where you can find Nimdzi Insights. So if you want more up-to-date research and analysis of the language services industry, make sure that you are following Nimdzi Insights on your platform of choice. We are recording this live today, and the full recording will remain available on the Nimdzi Insights YouTube channel as well as our LinkedIn page. So if you have a colleague that could benefit from this information, you can share the full recording with them of this live broadcast after we have ended it today. Now, normally you guys get to see me for these events, and I stay on screen for a lot longer, but today I'm going to turn the show over to the experts today. As I mentioned, we have Laszlo, Marjolein, and Renato. And Renato, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce what are we talking about? What is the Nimdzi 100? What are we talking about? And take it away, please.
Thank you, Tucker. It's very exciting. This is our flagship report, the report that requires the most work of our team and touches all the elements of the language industry. And this is the 8th year in a row that we published the Nimdzi 100. And this year, we extended and we published a sister report, the next 150. So we cover a universe of about 250 LSPs. That gives a representative picture of what the market is around the world. We put a lot of effort in our research. Unlike reports that focus on the surveys only, we put a lot of effort in going out of our way to find information about companies that don't like to respond to surveys, don't have time to respond to surveys. Some of these companies are publicly traded companies, so their information is open. Others are, we use our connections, our research, our data that you can find in some publications. And this year, for example, we added DeepL, which appears for the first time in our list, and it's one of the top companies in the market with close to $200 million in revenue. And other gems that you will find. We started reporting on Sorenson, an $800 million sign language company a few years ago that nobody had in the radar. The importance of this report I like to highlight is not only for people to know and compare themselves to their peers and competitors, but or for investors to understand how the market works. It's very important for all the players in the industry, for the smaller LSPs, for the freelance translators, for all the participants in this industry to understand a little bit what are the dynamics. We are in a market where competing not only for clients and dollars, but we're competing for talent. We're competing for information. We're competing for technology. And it's important for us to understand what are the dynamics of the industry in order to be able to make sound decisions and involving the future and the present, naturally, of our business. So this is the motivation. And as usual, this is a report that we offer for free to all our stakeholders and for you to understand where we are. And our focus is not only to gather this information and understand the dynamics of the market, but is also to be able to provide valuable information to our consulting clients and other types of clients that we have in the market. So if you participated in the survey, thank you. You are doing, you're helping us provide an unbiased view of the market. And if you haven't, why haven't you? So next year, maybe you will be in the Nimdzi 300, 350, depending on how many people join us in this exercise. But without further ado, I would like to pass the word to Laszlo, who led this exercise and who, with the help of Marjolein, did an amazing job writing and analyzing the dynamics of the market. Laszlo, you're muted.
No, I'm not. Thank you, Renato. And thank you, Renato. Welcome, everyone. And first of all, I would like to say a big thank you to the entire team who's contributing. It looks like it's kind of the three of us, Marjolein, myself, and Renato. It's actually the larger team. And if you download the printed copy or you get your hard copy, you will find out the entire team working on creating this year's report. Of course, the entire Nimdzi community and network of experts provided guidance, having all these decades of compound experience behind us from the industry. And a big special thanks upfront to Marjolein for joining the team. She was instrumental in getting most of the heavy lifting and the footwork done. It was an amazing collaboration. We're looking forward to this again next year. And I want to say that starting with some key highlights, the industry is growing. Thank you very much. That's it for today. See you at the next webinar. No, there's a little bit more to that than that. We actually, having looked at the numbers and analyzed it at the level of detail, previously we said the industry is growing exponentially. We dialed back a little bit our expectations for the growth. From previously we said it's going to be roughly 7% annual growth rate, and we said it's going to be more linear than that, at least for the next few years. And even the long-term outlook, we tuned down to about 5% growth. And there are various reasons behind our growth expectations. Number one, we see, of course, that from the data we see from the surveys and generally from the analysis, as Renato says, from various resources, we see that a great majority of language service providers are growing in revenue. And we also see that actually the margins are fairly well protected even in this new age of AI. Now you could say, oh yeah, Laszlo, but I hear there's so many buyers who are dialing down their budgets or being pressured from the top to spend less on localization, which is partly true. But also let's realize that the opportunity of AI, specifically large language models, bringing language technology and language services to the front creates a larger exposure to new clients who are willing to use language services and language technologies to produce multilingual content or reach audiences across the globe. And we foresee that an elastic level of per word price decrease is bringing in new demand to the industry, as it has done with almost every single step of technology improvement and innovation, even if that innovation comes from the outside, which was the case with machine translation. As we know, machine translation was not specifically invented. The new wave of neural machine translation was invented by Google. It did not come from the industry as such. Neither did large language models, which are largely based on the same architecture. They've been around, at least publicly, for the last 2.5 years. And we believe that all the new innovations that are currently being pursued by language technology and service providers, and very interestingly also by buyers, they're going to bring in a new age of content explosion, multilingual content explosion, and communication explosion in different modalities as well. And that's really important because in our findings, we understand that the traditional bread and butter translation work is, surprise, surprise, is diminishing, which is to say automations and technology are playing a greater and greater role in how all the content for multilingual audiences is produced. But not only translation work that is needed by now. Of course, we understand that voice and video content are just as important as textual content for communicating with international customers and users, which means there's a growing demand for creating all those experiences, especially online in the digital world. And many of those are also stepping over a threshold of cost constraints, where simply applying human expertise would have been too expensive previously. Whereas now with the new semi-automated, at least, human-in-the-loop approach, or whatever you would like to call it, suddenly costs are more affordable and permissive of language services being applied and multilingual audiences reached. Of course, we also see many hurdles and challenges. And generally, the macroeconomic and let's call it geopolitical situation is somewhat fragile. And as we know, and I don't live in the US, the other three on this call, they do. I happily live in Europe at this point of time. But many of the policies in the new US administration are certainly posing a challenge for international trade and operations for multinational companies. I think the report specifically mentions that while trade volumes may be impacted, the number of products that are probably traded and therefore the localization needs, they don't scale with the number of products sold, but with the different variations of the products being sold and traded, which is probably going to decrease, or if it's impacted at all, a lot less than the volume of overall trade. That said, there are different notions from economists saying, yes, but tariffs are going to increase inflation, which means there's less buying power from individuals and from businesses, and that there's an economic downturn just around the corner. Well, we'll see how that's going to unfold. We see that there's a level of volatility in general policies coming, especially from the US, and responses coming from Europe as well as from Asia, especially from China. It's still very early days to say what the longer term impact may be. We uphold currently our relatively positive outlook for the industry in general. Previously, we loved saying, and we maintained that the industry is impervious to crises. And many think and believe that AI is the crisis. But let's very quickly mention that most of the technology producers or AI labs who are creating these shiny new tools, they're great for productivity enhancement. They're not very good for replacing humans at this point of time. And there are really good examples from this, even outside of the localization industry, which is, many of these AI labs, they create their tools to enhance software coding capabilities. And while there are voices that say, hey, 80% of the code can be produced by AI in the next 6 months or 6 years, depending on which AI lab and which CEO says these words, the reality is that basically none of the major big tech providers have so far laid off en masse software coding staff. The risk, however, there is just as much as in the language industry very high that the application of AI may restrict or reduce the number of new entrants into the field, which is junior coders, just like junior translators, are probably the most impacted in many ways to be deterred by these AI tools to even enter the field. It's a risk for the industry, no doubt, and buyers and providers and educational institutions as well as governments all have a shared responsibility to make sure that there is a replenishment of new talent who are invited into this very exciting field of language services. Renato, you have a hand up and you want to say something.
I wanted to make a comment. You described very well the landscape and the risks and the fear, all these components that are affecting our analysis and our prediction for the market. But a little anecdote that I like to tell is that even though people are talking about all the capabilities of AI, OpenAI, the company that produces ChatGPT, the most used AI agent in the market, has a localization manager, uses a TMS, and has an LSP working for them. We used to have the same conversation in the past with Microsoft, having the Microsoft Translator and Google with Google Translate. Why they're going to kill the market. There were people that were afraid that these companies would come into the market and take away work from translators and LSPs. And what we saw in reality is that Microsoft probably has the biggest localization budget in the market still, and Google is a close second in terms of volume of localization work that they outsource. So the fact that technology exists and these companies provide this technology that affect our market doesn't necessarily mean that they use it themselves. So there is a limited reach and a limited capability for these technologies to impact the market. They're not a full replacement. They're just another technology that we see in life again, right? And there's going to be a new technology that is going to come up in 3 to 5 years or something like that, that is going to replace what we're talking about now, which is AI and things like that.
Yeah, we had and that was a concern. They have Google Translate, that's a concern. It's just a continuation of the same discussion. So it's really not a new problem. And I wanted to add, we're focused with this discussion on the language service industry for like traditional translation, and maybe thinking more about regular applications, but high-end applications just cannot rely on AI. The quality of a human translator is still valued very much. If you look at verticals like life sciences, pharmaceutical, where lives are at stake, this is a very important thing to remember. And we've heard this in conversations as well. There is no replacement for the human translator there. Legal is another one. And we see growth in all of those verticals. So those are doing very well, and they still rely on the quality of human translators. When you look at interpreting, it is now, at least for 4 years, consistently the fastest growing segment in the language industry. And this one just is going to be far behind on, AI replacing any kind of human interpreting. So those are the growing sectors in the industry, and they are all still very reliant on high quality linguists.
That's very well said. And quickly adding to what Renato, you mentioned, the Googles and Microsoft, some of the biggest spenders on localization, and OpenAI having a localization team. Well, so does DeepL have a localization team. They have a setup to make sure that, it's not just simply machine translated stuff, but it's done the right way. What does it mean, the right way? Well, as we all know, words don't just grow on trees, then they're fed into a machine that translates it and puts it back on another tree. It's rather almost always a fairly complex system where content is created and stored in different places. They need to be orchestrated together. And then somewhere, at least for quality assurance purposes, there needs to be a proofreader or a post editor, or generally a linguist to validate and verify the output, especially for high-risk content, which is supposed to trigger the emotional response from the users that is needed for brand loyalty or for purchasing, triggering purchasing actions. Of course, you can say, well, yeah, but the vast majority of the content is machine translated. Yes, it is. And there are companies where 99% of the content is machine translated. But that's exactly the low risk content that otherwise would never have been translated in the first place. Yeah. Which is to say, machine translation as such is a replacement for what we call no translation. And that's the alternative. And the same is true for machine interpreting. As Marla mentioned, in the interpreting space, AI is not making big waves yet because it can't replace the human. But have you ever used the built-in captioning and interpreting voice tools in the different conferencing platforms? You may have. You may have noticed actually it does a fairly decent job if you want to use this as a crutch. And that's pretty much true. There are a great many, when we talk to clients on the buyer side and say, well, it doesn't do the full job of an interpreter, but we can't afford an interpreter. We don't have budget for it. And still, these technologies, they can provide a really good support for multilingual communication that we need even within the company. And so many of these tools, they just find new markets, new use cases, new ways of creating that multilingual communication that previously would never have been covered with pure human workflows.
Yeah, so that's kind of the bulk of the discussion. Maybe we want to look at a couple of stats, some numbers, and some slides.
Please. We love stats and data.
Have people enjoy a little more than just our faces. So optimism. This all ties into the discussion we're having here, right? So we're seeing, interestingly, more optimism about people's own companies than about the industry in general. That means LSPs are saying, yeah, we're still thinking that the industry is strong, but we have more confidence about our own business doing well. So that is that's a really interesting thing, and we think that indicates that people see external factors, see other companies maybe struggling more than themselves, but overall, most LSPs are saying that they're doing well. So I would rely on that more than, how people have an idea about what's going on outside of their personal experience. Laszlo.
Well, there's an element also. You see that there's a group of people that have a negative opinion. There's the green are the very optimistic. The yellow is the majority where people are, and you have a lot of people that are very pessimistic. Those are the louder people. Those are the ones that are frustrated, that talk a lot, they have fear, and or it's not fear only. There's a real impact. I have seen companies in this first quarter of 2025 with reductions in revenue of about 20%, and that's very scary. But we still haven't seen like a mass disruption of layoffs, of companies going bankrupt, getting out of business, and things like that. So it's more like business as usual, I would say.
It's an adjusting economy. It's an adjusting business. It's not a full reset. Yeah.
I think if we dig down into the details, then we also find that many of the companies who are negative, that have a negative outlook for the future, they're very often founder-owned, and they don't see a new way out because they don't have the means or the financial funds to be able to keep up with the pace of innovation in the industry. And that is a real challenge, which is one of the reasons why we also foresee, mergers and acquisitions are speeding up, especially in the mid-market, and even in the highest echelon of the Nimdzi 100. We have seen many new CEOs coming in, and the management teams are changing. There seems to be an adjustment to the level of innovation. And the demands from the client side changing and shifting with C-level pressure for AI adoption, saying we need new leadership to be able to face these challenges and find new paths to growing, and not just maintaining the profits and the margins of the company, but to be able to maintain the brand awareness or increase it even within the industry, capture more clients, and understand how to target the industry. As Renato likes to say, and sorry for quoting you on this, Renato, you could be saying this, but many of the LSPs, they think that they're in the red ocean. Everybody's competing for the same clients. Everybody's competing for the same projects. In reality, it's not terribly challenging to find new ways of targeting segments of the industry. You can be best in a small part of the industry and still be a multi-million-dollar business, or even tens of millions of dollars of business. Renato, I guess you agree with that statement.
No, absolutely. It's the being a big fish in a small pond instead of a small fish in the ocean, right? There are niche markets. There are opportunities where companies can make a difference still. Because I was just last week at a conference. It was actually called the niche media market. One of our properties is Multilingual Magazine, and we were looking at what are the trends in the publishing industry, another industry that has been dying forever, but we were looking at various growth indicators and how companies are growing in that space. And it's a market where they don't know localization, they don't know translation. When you talk to a magazine that a magazine that publishes about asphalt, most of the people in their industry are immigrants working in this space. There's an opportunity. When we talked about this to the owners of that publication, there's an elevator. The elevator industry has 6 magazines, and I never thought of the elevator industry as being an industry, right? The landscaping industry has so many publications, and there's a lot of opportunity. Even magazine publishing could be a niche for somebody that decides to go into that market. Like this, there are so many niches all over the world. We had the story about Spain and Portugal without energy. The energy space renewable energy space is a niche market. It's very big in Europe, in China, and other markets. Packaging, pick any market. Not everybody needs to be doing software localization for IT companies in the West Coast of the United States. There are many industries that show lots of opportunity, and these are growth industries. Right. Back to you.
Let's look at some more slides. I like it. Change in demand. I love this graph. It's new, and we're focusing on each geographical region here. It's clearly we have an increase in demand in emerging markets. You're seeing Africa and South America. We're seeing a little bit of a loss of demand in Europe, or a more hesitant increase in demand, but overall it looks positive everywhere. So take a closer look at this when you get the report. Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think if doom and gloom was the future of the industry, we would have seen a lot more red on that slide before as a landslide. Yeah. And that is not what we're observing from the data that we actually have from the literally data-based research we've been conducting. And it's, I'm not going to say it's more optimistic than previous years, for sure not. But what we observe is that the majority of language service providers, they seem to experience a stable or increase in demand, whereas there is a number of probably, that's not necessarily 100% correct statement, but smaller LSPs who are still trying to make their living from the traditional methods of working, or working from large language service providers, multilingual vendors, and make a business from that. That is certainly a segment of the industry that is diminishing, while other segments and sectors are healthy and thriving. Marla, back to you.
Let's go back to the slides. Let's see, Gen AI impact. We asked everyone, and our pool this year, like Renato said in the beginning, is multiple hundreds of LSPs, like answering every single question. So we have quite a good data set. Looking back at last year, generative AI, the biggest disruptor. Overall, people are positive about it. They say the impact was positive, and almost 2/3 are projecting that they will see a positive impact from Gen AI in the year to come. Let's go to the next slide.
I want to quickly touch there something really interesting there's a bullet point that says that client-side maturity is increasing. And I think that's really critical, because the LSPs that say the Gen AI impact will be positive are typically those that have a way of integrating or incorporating those into the workflows, not necessarily by educating the clients, but by showing them that there is a way with which they can create additional value through the technology. And clients recognize this, and it's not just that from the top, from C-level, there's pressure, but also they understand and they read and they receive a lot of proposals from different providers. They're reaching a level of maturity where they understand what is real value proposal and what is snake oil. There is a better distinction between actual AI-enabled language service and technology providers and those that are just trying to say, hey, yeah, I can also use OpenAI to translate stuff and then push it through a few linguists. There's a real need for expertise of using large language models, generative AI, beyond just machine translation in workflows from client side. And actually, in a great many of the American and European RFPs, it's almost impossible to submit an RFP or have the RFP read by the evaluators without AI being flagged as a capability. But the scrutiny for the actual capability is becoming real. It's no longer just a tagline in service and technology providers' resumes.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Just highlighting the top 5 here, and also introducing a new thing that we're doing. The little icons you see, the blue ones, said that that's the companies that stayed in the same spot, in the same ranking compared to our last year's ranking. It is not an indicator of whether the revenues went up or down. So, there's some movement in the top 10, but the top 2 are pretty solid in their places. And if you look at the report, there's some newcomers in the top 10 even that were down below 25 before. So there's quite a lot of movement Let's go to the next slide.
No, wait, before we go to the next slide, just a comment on the top 5 there. You can notice that with the exception of TransPerfect and RWS, each one of the players has a certain niche that they specialize. So LanguageLine is an interpreting company.
Right.
Keywords is a gaming localization company. And Sorensen is a sign language interpreting company, right? So the biggest players in the industry, they're catering. We could have a ranking for each one of these, right? A ranking of interpreting companies that we produce, we should produce later this year. There could be a ranking for the gaming companies. There could be a ranking for the sign language interpreting companies, because they are almost sub-industries inside our industry. Back to you.
Sorry, the companies that serve just one vertical and get really good at it, you can tell that there's success to be had, and there's a history of success. Let's look at the next slide. It's a pretty simple one. We can go fast on this one. Revenue concentration, shifting a little bit. The top 10 are holding almost 10% of the full market share. So that's what we're looking at. The yellow and the green, that's the top 100. The blue is the rest of the market. So we still have a very fragmented industry. There's still room for a lot of consolidation. There were projections as long as 20 years ago that consolidation would have happened by now, and you would have had 3 major companies that are serving, a huge part of the language needs, and that's just not happening. So let's go to the next one. Growth by ranking segment. I really like looking at this. This compares 4 years, and we saw real boom years, 2021, 2022. Of course, all of these are compared to the previous year. So it indicates that there's growth in each segment every year, end on end. We see the biggest one in the top 50, and but definitely just kind of in line with our market projections. A little bit of a stabilizing of the growth after those boom years after COVID. Let's go to the next one. This one I really am excited about. This is a new way that we're visualizing the fastest growing LSPs. So you see the ones in green, they realize their growth by just organic business from services offered. The blue ones as from M&A. So you see the big bubble there, that's Propio. They acquired 3 companies. 2 of them were previously in the Nimdzi 100. So that answers for what their growth comes from. And the yellow is a combination of increased business and M&A activity. What other ones are there interesting there that you wanted to talk about, Laszlo?
Oh, I think these are all thoroughly interesting. I want to point out Lilt and DeepL as almost as very heavy technology providers. DeepL, of course, the famous German unicorn machine translation company. Interestingly, other players who are very strong in niches that are also here, Pixelogic and Zoo Digital. Zoo Digital bouncing back from kind of a year of hardships previously. And we're very happy to see Toppen on this list. They've been very strong, especially in the regulated industries and intellectual property, patent translation for growth. And Aclaro are actually here also because of mergers. They merged with Yonkers, also previously a top 100 company. So there are very interesting movements in the top 10. We mentioned Propio has entered, and we do expect that there will be further consolidation in the top 100 as well. We'll see how that goes this year. So far, there haven't been too many news from acquisitions. There are some smaller ones that we already know about. But it seems that growth could be coming either from acquisition or from organic growth in specific niches as well, which is great to see in the industry.
I have one thing to add about the acquisitions, and we don't have a slide on it, but year over year, we're seeing that there is more interest to purchase in the language services industry than there is to buy. So it's to sell. So it's a seller's market, right? The interest in consolidating, in purchasing other companies, in merging or in acquiring even from externally, private equity investors, that has been higher than the LSP's willingness to sell. And that indicates a very strong industry, not only as an opinion from within the industry, but also from outside of the industry. There is an acknowledgement that there is a lot of potential and continuing potential. So. This is a little bit hard to read from a distance, but growing revenue, always the biggest business challenge, implementing new processes and technologies, and price pressure. We have a little more detail farther along in the report. So yeah, it reflects a lot like last year. There's a couple of changes, but yeah, there's a lot of information here to unpack. So it's just an introduction to what's in the report.
I'll just pipe in and say the Nimdzi 100 is free to download. Go over to nimdzi.com. It's right there on the homepage. So if you want to dive deeper into any of these graphs that we're bringing up on screen today, go over and do that after the webinar or even during the webinar. You can follow along from home.
Great pitch. Thanks. Love it. So more on AI. It just is the biggest, it's the biggest topic, right? How are we adjusting? And I'm going to have to zoom in here a little bit. Thank you. Yes, increasing the use of MT, and then this is a comparison with last year. Reducing staff is up a little bit, and that doesn't necessarily, here's what we say in the report about that. It doesn't necessarily mean that linguists are no longer necessary. It means that there is also a need for really high quality linguists, and reducing staff is a real result of Gen AI. But again, as we said, if volumes increase, then even if companies are reducing staff a bit, if we're having more volumes, then there will be more work to do. So
Marjolein, just to add some comment to this.
Yeah.
There will be blood. This is, we are talking about the growth of the industry as a whole, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be even for everybody. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the same, the AI is going to have the same impact across all the categories in our industry. Naturally, and as a result, and this is a process, this is not an event, we're going to have adjustments in employment, in pricing, in pricing models, in organizational workflows, and so on. So automation brings change. However, there's a pattern in our industry that whenever you have these reductions in people inside organizations, because there's very little barrier to entry in the industry, what traditionally happens is that these people don't go away. They come back and they become, they start other translation companies. So I wouldn't be surprised if what happens is that when there is consolidation at the top, there is a group of these laid off people that go to the bottom and start the new companies that are going to rise up in the new cycle. So just a little parenthesis there.
I had to remind myself of what we determined from this, and not only this data, but from the conversations that we had with companies, which is that that this is the result of in-house linguist staffing or in-house linguists, and there is a trend for of sourcing talent abroad. There is a trend of not just having less in-house linguists, but offering more work for contractors. So in that way, this only indicates in-house linguists. So that's a good thing to remember.
Well, not only linguists, but there are also project managers, vendor managers, accounting people,
engineers.
There's a lot more global sourcing now. And
it's not only linguists, it affects all the roles in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Tucker,
I'm
I have a
questioning.
question.
I'm questioning whether or not we want to go to chat here because people are.
That's what I wanted to say. I
All right.
wanted to ask the question if we have questions.
Brilliant minds think alike, right? Elon asks, you showed the steady annual rise in the industry size. How does the recent RWS news impact that?
It's a very good question.
Renato,
Renato, do you want to take a?
Yes,
I know.
yes.
I know this is a Renato question. Pontificate. Teach us, Rabbi.
No, Elon, this is a classic example of the bad news taking over the good news. If you really read the story, what RWS reported was that their revenue and their margins were not going to be as good as they had mentioned it was going to be. So it's not that they are losing money, that they're going out of business, that they're losing clients, and so on. No, the story is that the growth is not going to be as good as they had announced before, right? So this has an impact on their share price. The news about RWS is that their value, their share went down. But for us industry players, it's just maybe it's taking longer for them to implement, and they describe it. And many of the factors that affected their announcement were off-balance sheet costs, things that were not necessarily related to the language business, but related to their organization, their business as a whole. So I wrote some time ago, like a tree falling makes more noise than the forest growing. This is a classic example. It's not bad news. It's just not as good news as people wanted it to be, right?
And that tree is not even falling.
It's not even falling, exactly.
They're saying that on
stock price, which is a metric that has nothing to do with the business. It's a perception, it's a feeling of the market about the performance of an investment. It has affected 200 other companies on the same day in the stock exchange, because there are news about what is happening in the United States, trade. There are many factors that affect this valuation of the company, which is essentially what the stock price is. So there is a difference. RWS, from the point that we're discussing in this conversation here, the impact in our analysis is zero, because we're not tracking stock price, we're tracking performance. And they might lose. The fact that they lose business doesn't mean that the business went away. Maybe it went to another competitor. So it's a zero-sum thing. They lost an account, which I don't know, which is not what it reports. But if it were, they probably lost it to somebody else. So that work didn't disappear. It just went somewhere else.
Right.
Which is all speculations.
Yes.
For the record. Companies like RWS have lawyers, so let's be careful what we say.
Well, we're not RWS,
Right.
but you're right, Renato. What actually changed with RWS is the profitability, mainly on what they call organic constant currency. They're fairly level, or slight increase in revenues, I think, compared to similar time last year. But they're saying, it's the profit warning that was issued to say the profits are lower than expected. And then one thing to that is we don't really know all the details before they release the actual financial statement for the first half year, how much of that was really technology investment and how much other factors contributed to it. The impact might be, long term, again, speculatively, is how much investment they can make into their ongoing transformation. Let's realize that RWS is one of the behemoths of the industry. And, big ships like the Titanic are hard to turn, but it doesn't mean that they're going to sink. Exactly. It doesn't mean the tree is falling. It can still make a lot of noise, and that's exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah, fair enough. And I see some other questions in the chat. I'm gonna power on here with the slides just because it's my job to watch the clock.
Let's not run out of time.
Yeah. So let's talk about. We've been talking about the changing revenue. Tell us more.
Sure. Still, as you can see, so at the top here is what we asked LSPs last year about their last quarter, and then how they're expecting things to change into the new year. And then below is what we asked this year. So we're doing our research in Q1, so we're asking how was the most recent quarter and how are you thinking things are going to be in the next one. It's overall green. That's the thing. Optimism is high. 50% of people are expecting their revenues to increase. Not that they are going to be profitable. They are expecting to increase their revenue, like more than the previous quarter. And almost half of them already said that their previous quarter, they already increased their revenue. So that is a very, very strong, stable trend saying that there is growth. So this really amplifies our growth projections. And then here we just have some, we've listed the growth services and growth verticals. This is based on actual revenue splits. So we asked LSPs, how much money did you make here? How much money did you make there? And we can calculate based on last year, compared to last year, which ones are growing. And then we've also asked the LSPs to indicate where they're seeing an increase in demand. So this kind of ties everything together we've been talking about before. MT and post editing, data and AI services, prompt engineering. That's one we hadn't discussed, but there is a lot of work there for people with language background, tech background. Mixing those two, that's the magic to go forward, right? Linguistic skills and technology skills. Sign language interpreting, right? They're all there in the top 10. They're very, very strong services. Verticals, we also mentioned before, healthcare. Work for private entities is very strong. Government contracts are unique in a way that they usually last for multiple years. So that's not something you can very easily lose. It's not, yeah, Renato is saying that. Okay, Renato.
They're easier to lose than they are to win.
For Europe.
Yeah. Well, we have, and we're going to have to measure this later. We have a Trump effect here in the United States that has canceled a bunch of long-term contracts that people had. But anyway, we calculated the impact of that earlier this year. It's less than we had imagined. It's important, it's significant, but it's not devastating for the market. Laszlo and I don't remember how much we calculated, but it's less than $1 billion in impact. Yes.
The potential impact, and we'll see, because we already hear that many of the services are popping back into existence.
Yeah.
In terms of demand, but we also know, building down, or rather demolishing some of the US-funded programs, whether it be USAID or even exiting the WHO, they do have an impact on language services. It doesn't mean that other actors will not pick up the funding for those. It does mean that the US government is, in many ways, trying to spend less. Let's just put it this way. And then the long-term impact is to be seen, because as we know, many of the policies that have been created, they can be reversed. And
so if we have an impact, the calculation that we had, the maximum impact would be under $1 billion for this kind of work for the market as a whole. So we're talking, putting in this context, we're talking about a $75 billion market, and 1 billion in 75 is not that much of a impact in the industry as a whole. It really has impacted and devastated individual players. Some companies that relied exclusively on that type of work are out. It's like I said, there will be blood. There is blood, but it's not evenly distributed. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you're listening to this and you're saying, well, Renato says everything's going fine, Laszlo says we're growing, but I'm going bankrupt. It's like, yes, we see you, we hear you. The intention is not to say that there hasn't been companies that are losing revenue this year. It's just as a whole, as a market trend, the localization industry is trending up. And you talk about growth not being evenly distributed. Let's take a look at the market share, shall we?
And on the growth verticals too, and you don't need to go back to the slide, but we've mentioned this before. The strong verticals are the ones where there's always a bunch of money flying around. Like, there are strong industries. We're not only looking at the health of the language industry itself. There are strong industries out there. There are multimedia, there are video games, financial, legal, government, consistent verticals where a lot of money moves around, and healthcare, of course. So these are the strong verticals, and that's why. So there is, like Renato said, it's a zero-sum game. There is money. It's just, we're just looking at where it's moving, right? So, okay, the next one, I really love what we did with the Atlas this year. We have included maps of both the 100 largest LSPs and the full market. So growth and market share combined, I think it's really nice to have them side by side. So you see North America, biggest growth, biggest market share, almost half. But what's fun to look at is the full picture, right? I always like looking at emerging markets, and then we, of course, compare in the report to last year as well. Laszlo, you have something to say?
We also inserted a lovely map into the next 150, where the good news is
that,
even though there are no top 100 LSPs in Africa or South America, but there are next 150 players there. So we're looking forward to perhaps seeing some movement coming from those regions. As we know, services are growing there. AI is not very supportive of low resource languages, specifically looking at Africa. But we know that also because of many of the protectionist or globalization fragmenting policies, they need to rely on themselves in many ways. We're looking forward to growth coming from that region or those regions as well. And let's see what next year's numbers will show.
Yeah, and that is a really fun thing to compare the top 100 and the next 150. So I invite people to do that later. Where the clients are, this is what everybody wants to know about. And we're saying market share here in percentage, and then we have used our estimation for the market size and applied it, of course, to each geo region, because it's just nice to see the dollars and know what's available. 33.1 billion annually available in North America as a market. And here too, we see an increase of South America, Africa as potential markets. You think 0.4% doesn't mean anything, but there's still $300 million there to be had.
Well, and very importantly, of course, there are a great many multinational companies that have daughter companies in those regions, but they count as headquartered in the U.S. or Europe or even in China. So they would not count as a company from Africa buying language services, but still local demand is there in Africa as well. Would love to be able to break it down to that level. If language service providers who respond to our survey are willing to fill in 5 more pages, we're happy to do that too.
Exactly. Now these maps are just fun to have and refer to, and like you said, the next 150 shows quite a different picture. The mid market and the top market, they're quite different. So we have one more slide, and that's a slide that Laszlo made, so he gets to talk about it.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. So the idea was to ask LSPs what the impact is or was last year and what the impact is going to be this year. And I think the most important message here is the shrinking of the middle ground. There are less LSPs who are uncertain as to what's going to happen. So more or less, the industry is finding its way. It's either going to be positive impact or negative impact. There's almost no middle ground, which means if you are a language service provider and watching this, then you're also thinking, have I made the right decisions in my investments? Seeing that there are 60% of LSPs greater than $50 million revenue who see a positive impact, but similar to 60% under or about 50 million. And you need to reconsider how much time, effort, and human resources, literally human resources, you're willing to put into incorporating AI and connected services into your offerings and making sure that your clients understand how far AI can go and what the added value you and your organization can bring to your buyers and your customers, because your buyers and customers are genuinely interested in doing this. All right.
Yeah.
Tucker, we have 5 minutes. I'm sure that there are gajillions of questions.
Closing slide, and
We-
I'd love to get some questions answered.
We have 5 minutes. Not a ton of questions here today. Lots of activity in chat. I always appreciate people contributing to
Arancha, that's a
chats.
good note.
I like the
Yeah.
optimistic one.
Yeah,
How are you
Arancha says,
if you're pessimist?
yeah, because we are business owners, you better be an optimist if you run a company. Yeah, I struggle with that. Elon again says, what about, this is a question, what about quality? What about quality? How important is this? When will we achieve near perfection of quality?
There's no such thing as near perfection.
Yeah, there we go.
So this is
Users
another
say what's good.
webinar. Let's not get into that.
Do you see,
No, but
Elon, why I
have
didn't
to
bring your
say-
question up sooner? Because it's a whole other
So
webinar.
just
Very
since we're
well.
about to close, I'd like to share a couple of thoughts. First of all, for you, LSPs that are participating here, and translators too, this is the moment for you to join your association, participate in events, be part of the conversation, and not become a victim of disinformation, right? So in moments of change and transition is the moments where you need a lot of communication, community, conversations, and the ability to share and learn from peers and people that are working in this space. The other thing is there are lots of sources of information in our industry. Be aware of them. Subscribe to multilingual magazines, subscribe to Slater, read CSA research, and read us and work with us. All this gives you a good sense of where this industry is going. Nobody is 100% right. Our score so far has been pretty good, but it's a transition, it's a change, but change is going to happen again. I invite you, if you haven't yet, to read our report that is also available for free in our website, the Language Industry Curve, which is how we predict things are going to happen in the next 10 years in this industry. And we try to give you a sense that will help you understand why at Nimdzi we have looked at patterns, we understand how things are, and we try not to fall into the trap of just repeating becoming an echo chamber of a certain type of news. So we looked at the data objectively, and we tried to see where we're going with this. AI is just another technology. There's going to be another one coming soon, and we're going to go through this conversation all over again. We are in the business of communication, and whenever there is change, whenever there is uncertainty, whenever there is fear, there is more need for communication, more need for conversations, more need for debate. And that is content that needs to be translated. And this is where this industry comes and impacts what happens in the world. So you are part of this change. Your best weapon is to be informed. And this is what we try to provide you here. Good, unbiased information about the business that you're in.
Thank you, Renato. I'm going to jump in here. Thank you to Laszlo. Thank you to Marjolein. Thank you to Renato, our team of experts joining us today, trying their best to give you all of the information that is found in the Nimdzi 100, our annual Nimdzi 100 market research report. If you haven't already done so, as I mentioned, nimdzi.com. It's easy to find. Click on over. You've got the full report, including all of the graphs, including all of the data sets at your fingertips. If you are serious about your career in the localization industry, if you are the CEO of an LSP, if you are a buyer looking to better understand the industry in which you are purchasing services, you owe it to yourself. Go over, read the Nimdzi 100 report. It's there. If you'd rather have a PDF that you can send to your boss so that they can read it, or a colleague, you can download the whole PDF and the whole report in PDF format.
Order a print copy. Yeah.
I'm getting there. Or you can even order a print copy if you see
I'm
a
just
link.
so excited about printing.
It is very excited. Marjolein obviously has a print background, but you can actually order a print copy to have, add it to your bookcase, put it behind your webcam so that people see it and you look smart. That's what I do with all of my stuff back there. Also, after you finish reading the Nimdzi 100 report, go over to the next 150. We're bringing to you more than just the top 100 this year. We're bringing to you the next 150, and there are plenty of insights to be gained, not just from looking at the Nimdzi 100, but the Nimdzi 250, as we should say. So after this webcast, you are going to, first of all, go over to nimdzi.com, read the Nimdzi 100, read the Nimdzi 150, order your print copy. You're also got some more homework for you. You're going to subscribe to Nimdzi Insight so that you can be up to date when we publish new research like this or when we have new webinars and live streams. You're going to follow Multilingual Media, so you're going to subscribe to them. You can get print magazines delivered to your doorstep every month, or you can check out multilingual.com for daily industry news. I guarantee you, if you read Multilingual every single day, you're going to be the best informed person in the office about the language services industry. So with that, my name is Tucker Johnson. It's been my pleasure to host this panel of very qualified, very experienced, very knowledgeable experts today. Thank you to them. Thank you to everybody in chat who participated in conversation, submitted questions. Thank you to all of the Nimdzi researchers here behind the scenes putting together this research so that we all as an industry can grow together. And I look forward to next time. Cheers.